The bridge of the Zelhari flagship Gentle Current looked like a scene from a nightmare. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as Ambassador Velthari stumbled between control stations, her long ears drooping with exhaustion. She hadn't slept in 3 rotations, not since the Keth for Death ships had appeared in their outer colonies. "Ma'am, we're losing contact with New Garden," reported her communications aide, his voice cracking with fear. "The Kethfer are jamming all frequencies." Before they harvest, Balthari closed her large, gentle eyes for a moment. New Garden had been home to 12 million Zelhari families. Farmers, artists, children who had never seen violence in their entire lives. Now they were gone, processed into protein paste for the Kethfer war machine. "How many worlds left?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. 3, Ambassador. Just 3. And the Zelhari had been a proud confederation once, spread across 15 garden worlds where violence was unknown. They grew the most beautiful flowers in the galaxy, wrote poetry that moved other species to tears, and built cities that looked like living art. But they had never learned to fight. Why would they? For 3,000 years, no one had threatened. Then the Kethfer Empire had swept in from the galactic rim like a plague of locusts. These weren't just conquerors, they were harvesters. They didn't want territory or resources, they wanted flesh. The Kethfer ate other sentient species, preferring the meat of peaceful herbivores, like the Zelhari. Again, Velthari whispered, pressing her 4-fingered hands against the ancient communication console. "Target the Sol system." Her aide looked confused. "Ambassador, that's a primitive system. The inhabitants there are barely spacefaring." "It could they possibly do?" Balthari had heard whispers in the old trade networks. Stories about a young species called humans who showed unusual kindness to strangers. They supposedly sent medical aid to disaster zones and helped refugees without asking for payment. If anyone would send supplies or refugee ships, it would be these compassionate Terrans. "There are only hope," she said softly. The distress signal burst from Gentle Current and raced through hyperspace toward the small yellow star humans called Sol. It carried a simple message. "We are dying. Please help. We need medicine, food, ships to carry our children to safety. We have nowhere else to turn, light years away, in Earth's orbital defense station." Captain Hanzol Kim was finishing his 3rd cup of coffee when the alien transmission hit their sensors. The grizzled officer had seen enough combat in the Titan Wars to know trouble when he heard it, and this message reeked of desperation. "Officer Park," he called out to his communications specialist. "Run that signal through." The translation matrix again. Something doesn't sound right. Lieutenant Park Sang-min, a young woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, worked her console like a pianist playing a complex piece. "Sir, the translation is clean. Requesting humanitarian assistance. Medical supplies. Refugee transport. Food aid." Hansal studied the star charts on his main screen. The signal came from way out in the Outer Rim, a region most humans had never even heard of. But the coordinates matched reports from long-range scouts about some kind of war happening in that sector. "What do we know about the species sending?" "This?" he asked. "Database shows them as Zelhari, sir. Peaceful herbivores. Never engaged in warfare. They're basically space farmers." Hansal felt his jaw tighten. He'd grown up on a farming colony before joining the military. The idea of someone hunting farmers like animals made his blood boil. And who's attacking them? Something called the Kethfer Empire? Our scouts classify them as aggressive carnivores. With a taste for ... Park paused, checking her data. "They eat other sentient species. They're literally hunting the Zelhari for food." The bridge went dead silent. Every human officer present had the same thought. Someone was hunting peaceful farmers to eat them. On Earth, that was called murder. In space, Hansal was pretty sure it was called genocide. "Get me Admiral Lee," Hansal ordered. "Priority channel." Within minutes, Admiral Lee Tae-hung's weathered face appeared on the communication screen. The old warrior had fought in every major human conflict for the past 30 years, and his eyes still burned with the fire that had made him a legend. "Captain Kim, what's the situation?" We have a distress call from the Outer Rim, sir. Peaceful aliens being hunted to extinction by carnivorous raiders. They're asking for humanitarian aid. Lee studied the data Hansel transmitted. His expression grew darker with each detail about the Kethver Empire and their systematic harvesting of entire worlds. Humanitarian aid. Lee repeated slowly. They want food and medicine. Yes, sir. And refugee transport. Admiral Lee was quiet for a long moment. Then a cold smile crossed his face. Captain, prepare your ship for immediate departure. I'm mobilizing the 3rd Colonial Fleet. Sir, they're not asking for military intervention, just supplies. Captain Kimley, said his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. When someone asks humanity for help, we don't send half measures. These Kethvar want to hunt innocent farmers. Fine, let them meet some real predators. Within hours, Earth's orbital shipyards erupted with activity. The 3rd Colonial Fleet consisted of 57 warships, from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets. Fusion drives ignited like small suns as weapon systems came online, and Marines boarded assault shuttles. The indomitable Han Sol's heavy cruiser led the formation as they prepared for the hyperspace jump. Around him, his bridge crew worked. With practiced efficiency, these were veterans who had fought in the asteroid belts of Titan, who had learned warfare in the hardest school in the galaxy. All ships report ready, sir, announced his tactical officer. Han Sol looked at the star. Chart one more time. The Zelhari had asked for aid, expecting medicine and transport ships. Instead, they were about to receive the full might of humanity's war machine. Jump, he ordered. 57 human warships vanished into hyperspace, carrying death toward those who preyed on the innocent. The Zelhari wanted help. Earth would provide it in the only way humans truly understood. By removing the threat permanently, the galaxy was about to learn why Earth was classified as a death world, and why humans had never learned the meaning of the word surrender. The fabric of space twisted and tore as 57 human warships punched through hyperspace into Zelhari territory. Reality bent around their emergence, creating ripples of energy that lit up every sensor for light years around. At the center of this devastating formation, the dreadnought Sol's hammer hung in space like a steel predator. Its hull scarred from a dozen battles across the galaxy, Admiral Lee Tae-young stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display. Around him, holographic screens showed the positions of his fleet destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and assault ships arranged in perfect battle formation. These weren't the clean, peaceful vessels the Zelhari had expected. These were machines built for one purpose: war. Sir, we're detecting multiple contacts approaching. From the inner system, reported Lieutenant Commander Shin Yujin from her sensor station. The young officer had earned her rank fighting pirates in the Centauri sector, and her voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who had seen real combat. Configuration suggests they're Zelhari vessels, but they're moving very slowly. Admiral Lee observed. Smart. If I saw this fleet appearing in my backyard, I'd be cautious too. The Zelhari ships were indeed moving carefully. 3 vessels that looked more like floating gardens than military craft approached the human formation. Their hulls were smooth and curved, painted in soft pastels that reminded human observers of flowers. Beautiful, certainly, but about as militarily useful as tissue paper against the angular, weapon-bristled hulls of the Colonial Navy. We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel, announced Communications Officer Beek Min-jun. They're requesting to speak with our commanding officer. Put them through, Lee ordered. The main screen flickered to life. And suddenly, the Bridge of Sol's hammer was looking into an alien environment that might have been designed by poets rather than engineers. Soft lighting illuminated walls covered in living vines, and the air seemed to shimmer with floating pollen. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely defenseless. Ambassador Velthari appeared in the center of the screen. Her four-fingered hands pressed together in what humans would recognize as a nervous gesture. Her large, dark eyes, evolved for gathering light on peaceful worlds, widened as she took in the human bridge. Behind Admiral Lee, she could see tactical displays showing weapon systems, battle damage assessments, and target acquisition screens. This wasn't the medical frigate she had expected. "We sent a request for medical supplies and refugee ships," she said hesitantly, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "Your vessels appear to be military in nature." Admiral Lee stepped forward, and even through the transmission, his presence filled the screen. He was a man who had commanded fleets in the asteroid wars of Titan, who had led boarding actions against pirate strongholds, who had never retreated from a fight in 30 years of service. When he spoke, it was with the quiet authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard. "Ambassador, we received your distress call. We're here to provide aid." "But these are warships." Velthari's voice cracked with confusion and growing fear. Behind her, other Zelhari officials whispered among themselves, their flower-like faces showing expressions of alarm. "Yes," Lee replied simply, as if he were discussing the weather. "We're here to eliminate the threat to your people, permanently." The silence that followed stretched across the void between ships. On the Zelhari bridge, Ambassador Velthari stared at the human admiral as if he had just spoken in an alien language, which in a way he had. The concept of solving problems through overwhelming violence was as foreign to the Zelhari as growing flowers would be to the Kethfer. "Your species, ... She began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "Your species fights?" "We excel at it," said Lee, matter-of-factly. Around him, his bridge crew continued their work with practiced efficiency. Weapons Officer Park Hyun-soo was running diagnostics on the main batteries. Navigation Officer Kim Sora was plotting attack vectors to every major population center in the system. Marine Commander Jung Woo-jin was reviewing boarding protocols. To them, this was just another day at the office. "I don't understand," Velthari whispered. "We asked for medical aid, food, transport ships for our children." "Lieutenant Commander." Shin looked up from her sensor station. "Admiral, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the outer system. Multiple contacts, moving fast. Configuration matches the Kethver vessels from our intelligence reports." "Perfect timing, Lee," said grimly. "Ambassador, you're about to see why we brought warships instead of hospital ships." On the tactical display, red dots appeared at the edge of the system. The Kethver had arrived, expecting to find defenseless prey in their usual harvest of terrified herbivores. Instead, they found 57 human warships locked and loaded for battle. "Now, Ambassador," Admiral Lee continued, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a student, "tell us everything about the Kethver Empire. Ship classifications, weapon systems, typical tactics, command structure, everything." As the briefing progressed, the Zelhari leadership grew increasingly alarmed. These humans didn't just know about warfare. They approached it like scientists studying a particularly interesting specimen. Admiral Lee asked detailed questions about Kethver armor thickness, weapon ranges, and ship speeds with the same casual interest another species might show when discussing crop yields. "Your world?" Velthari asked during a pause in the tactical discussion. "What is it like?" "Earth." Communications Officer Beak looked up from his station. "Class 12 Deathworld. Gravity that would crush most species, atmosphere that's technically poisonous, weather patterns that include city-destroying storms, and wildlife that considers everything else food." "And you survived there?" "More than survived," Admiral Lee said. "We thrived, became the apex predator on a world full of apex predators. We learned to hunt things that hunted us, turned a planet that wanted to kill us into our home." The Zelhari officials exchanged horrified glances. In their galaxy, peaceful species sent aid to each other. They shared technology, resources, and knowledge. They didn't turn their children into weapons and their worlds into training grounds for war. "But you came to help us," Velthari said. Though her voice carried uncertainty, "You could have ignored our call." Admiral Lee's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, the career military officer stepped aside to reveal the man underneath. "Ambassador, every human world was once like yours. Peaceful, vulnerable. We learned to fight because we had to, not because we wanted to. But we never forgot what it was like to need help." He gestured to the tactical display, where the Kethver fleet was rapidly approaching. The difference is, we became strong enough to choose our battles. We choose to fight monsters. The Kethver harvest worlds for food, Velthari whispered. They eat other sentient species. They've killed billions of my people. Then they're about to learn why humanity has never been prey, Lee replied, his voice carrying the promise of violence. Signal the fleet. All ships. Battle stations. Let's show these cannibals what happens when they hunt farmers under human protection. The Bridge of Souls hammer erupted into controlled chaos as the crew prepared for battle. But Admiral Lee's final words to Ambassador Velthari carried across the channel. Reassuring the terrified alien leader, "We don't prey on the innocent, Ambassador. We hunt those who do." Commander Ominho pressed his body against the cold metal wall of his destroyer's bridge as Bison's edge drifted through the asteroid field like a ghost. The ship's engines were completely silent, running on battery power alone, while the massive rocks around them provided perfect cover. Through the viewport, he could see chunks of ice and metal slowly tumbling past, some as large as buildings, others no bigger than his fist. "Sir, we've been drifting for 6 hours," whispered Engineer Park Donghyun from his station. "The crew is getting restless." "Good," Minho replied quietly. "Restless means ready to fight." The Bison's Edge was not an impressive ship by human standards. At only 200 meters long, it was dwarfed by the massive dreadnoughts and carriers of the main fleet. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in speed and the sheer stubbornness of its crew. These were soldiers who had learned to fight in the cramped corridors of asteroid mining stations, where every battle was personal and every victory came at a price. "Contact," hissed Lieutenant Cha Bo-young from the sensor station. Her voice was barely audible, but it cut through the bridge like a knife. 3 large vessels, approaching from Galactic North. Configuration matches Kethver, heavy cruisers. Minho moved carefully to the tactical display, his boots making no sound on the deck plates. The 3 ships showed up as massive red dots. On the screen, each one over 800 meters long and bristling with weapons. Against any normal opponent, they would be unstoppable. But the Kethver had never fought humans before. "What's their target?" he asked. "The Zelhari colony ship Peaceful Garden," Bo-young reported. "She's carrying 50,000 refugees from the outer worlds, women, children, elderly. They're completely defenseless." Minho felt his jaw clench. The Peaceful Garden was exactly what its name suggested, a converted agricultural vessel that had been pressed into service as a refugee transport. It had no weapons, no armor, and no military escort. The Kethver had probably been tracking it for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "How long until they reach the colony ship?" asked. 15 minutes at current speed." Minho studied the tactical display. The 3 Kethver cruisers were moving in a loose formation, confident in their superiority. They had no idea that a human destroyer was hiding in the asteroid field, watching their every move. But more importantly, they had no idea what humans were capable of when protecting innocent lives. "All stations, this is the commander," Minho announced over the ship's internal communication system. "We have 3 Kethver heavy cruisers about to attack a refugee ship. Our orders are to prevent that from happening, by any means necessary." In the engine room, Chief Engineer Kim Jae-sung began pushing the fusion reactors beyond their safety limits. In the weapons bay, gunners mate Lehigh and Seek armed every missile and torpedo in their arsenal. Throughout the ship, 200 human sailors prepared to do what their species did best: fight impossible odds with everything they had. "Sir," Bo-young said, her voice tight with concern, "those cruisers outgun us 20 to 1. Their armor is 3 times thicker than ours." "This is suicide," Minho replied with a cold smile. "But the Kethver are about to learn something about human military doctrine. We don't fight fair. We fight to win." He turned to the helm officer. "Prepare for ramming speed." The bridge went dead silent. Ramming speed was exactly what it sounded like, deliberately colliding with an enemy vessel at the highest possible velocity. It was a tactic that no civilized species would ever consider. After all, it usually meant the destruction of both ships and the death of everyone aboard. But humans weren't civilized. They were survivors. Sir, the helm officer said slowly, ramming speed will likely destroy both vessels. The HFY cruiser, yes, Minho agreed, but we're built different. This ship has been reinforced with titanium steel plating salvaged from asteroid mining equipment. We're designed to punch through solid rock. The pretty little cruiser is designed to intimidate herbivores. The tactical display showed the enemy ships getting closer to the refugee vessel. Soon, the slaughter would begin, unless someone stopped. "It all hands, brace for impact," Minho announced. "Engine room, give me everything you've got." Bison's edge erupted from the asteroid field like a predator lunging from ambush. The fusion engines roared to life, pushing the destroyer to speeds that would have torn apart a lesser vessel. The ship's hull groaned under the stress, but it held together through pure human engineering and stubborn determination. The lead HFY cruiser detected the threat with barely 3 seconds to spare. Warning klaxons blared across their bridge as their captains screamed orders in their harsh, guttural language, but 3 seconds wasn't enough time to change course, wasn't enough time to raise additional shields, wasn't enough time to do anything except watch death approach at 30,000 kilometers per hour. Asterisk. Dawson's edge. Asterisk struck the cruiser's port side like a spear thrust by an angry god. Human destroyers' reinforced prow punched through the alien's hull plating as if it were made of paper. Atmosphere vented into space in a brilliant cloud of ice crystals, carrying with it the bodies of HFY crew members who had been caught in the decompression. The destroyer's momentum carried it completely through the enemy ship, urging from the other side with its armor scarred and blackened, but its structure intact. Behind it, the HFY cruiser broke apart in slow motion. Got it. Its back snapped by the impact commander. O activated the communications system, broadcasting on all frequencies. To the remaining enemy vessels, when he spoke, his voice carried the cold authority of someone who had just proven he was willing to die to protect innocent lives. "This is Commander Ominho of the United Colonial Navy. You have 10 seconds to withdraw from Zelhari space before we demonstrate why humans survived on a world that tried to kill us every single day." On the bridges of the remaining HFY cruisers, alien commanders stared at their screens in shock. They had never seen anything like this. The human ship had deliberately rammed their companion vessel, something no sane species would ever attempt. So these weren't warriors fighting for territory or resources. These were madmen who treated their own lives as expendable weapons. "Sir," reported the HFY tactical officer on the second cruiser, "our weapons can destroy that ship easily. It's damaged from the collision, and then what?" The captain snarled. "They'll send another one, and another. Did you see what just happened? They're willing to die to stop us. All of them." The truth was sinking in across the HFY fleet. They were used to fighting species that valued their own lives, that would retreat when faced with superior firepower. But these humans fought like cornered animals, with nothing left to lose. They turned their ships into weapons, their bodies into ammunition, their very existence into a threat. The 2 remaining cruisers fired their engines and fled the system, leaving their dead companion floating in the void. Word spread quickly through the HFY communication networks. The humans didn't fight like civilized beings. They fought like the universe itself was trying to kill them. They had decided to kill it back. Aboard Bison's edge, Commander O watched the enemy ship's retreat and allowed himself a small smile. The refugee ship Peaceful Garden was safe. 50,000 Zelhari lives had been preserved, and the galaxy had just learned a valuable lesson about human determination. "Damage report," he called out. "Hull breach on decks 4 and 5, but the compartments are sealed," reported Engineer Park. "We lost some armor plating, but the reactor is stable and weapons are still online." "Good enough," Minho said. "Signal the fleet. Tell them the HFY are learning to run." Captain Yoon Hijin pressed her back against the bulkhead of the HFY battleship, its devouring maw as green chlorine gas hissed from the ventilation systems. The alien ship's corridors were filled with the deadly poison, thick enough to kill most organic life within minutes. Around her, 24 human Marines moved through the toxic fog like ghosts, their black armor making them nearly invisible in the dim emergency lighting. "Contact front," whispered Sergeant Kim Taejon through the comm system. "For hostiles, armed with energy weapons. Hyjin peered around the corner and saw the Kethver soldiers, massive, insect-like creatures with razor-sharp claws and mandibles that could crush bone. They wore breathing apparatus to protect themselves from their own poisonous trap. Confident that no boarding party could survive in the toxic atmosphere they had created, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Remember, we're not here to play fair, Hyjin told her team. We're here to win. Move. The human Marines flowed around the corner like water, their movements coordinated through years of training in Earth's most hostile environments. These weren't regular soldiers. They were specialists who had learned urban warfare in the ruins of Detroit, jungle combat in the Amazon rainforest, and close quarters fighting in the methane storms of Titan. The Kethver opened fire with their plasma weapons, filling the corridor with deadly energy bolts. But the Marines had already scattered, using the ship's own structure as cover while they closed the distance. Within seconds, the aliens found themselves facing an enemy that moved like smoke and struck like lightning. Section 4 secured, Hyjin reported through her comm, stepping over the bodies of the alien defenders. Despite being surrounded by enough poison gas to kill a small city, she wasn't even breathing hard. Her suit's life support system was working perfectly. More importantly, humans had evolved on a world where the air itself was often toxic. "Copy that, Captain," came Admiral Lee's voice through the communication system. "How are you holding? Up in that soup?" Hyjin looked around at the green fog that filled every corridor. "Sir, this isn't much worse than the air in Seoul during summer smog season. We're good to continue." Meanwhile, 3 decks above, Corporal Park Min-soo was having his own encounter with Kethver ingenuity. The aliens had sealed themselves behind blast doors that were 6 inches thick and supposedly impenetrable. The Kethver commander probably thought he was safe. Protected by enough armor to stop a tank round, he hadn't counted on human creativity. "Yo, Captain," Park called over the comm. "I need about 30 seconds to get through this door." "You have breaching charges?" Hyjin asked. "Something better?" "If spite?" "In a really bad attitude." Park pulled out a small device that looked like a metallic spider. It was a plasma cutter designed for salvage operations in space, capable of slicing through asteroid rock and spaceship hulls. He placed it on the blast door and activated the timer. "Fire in the hole," he announced cheerfully. The plasma cutter burned through the supposedly impenetrable barrier like it was made of cheese. When the door fell inward, Park stepped through the smoking hole with a grin on his face. "Knock knock," he said to the terrified aliens inside. But the real show was happening outside the ship, where Lieutenant Nam Subin was putting on a flying WN display that defied every law of physics and common sense. Her fighter, Calcine Razor, weaved through a debris field that looked like the aftermath of a cosmic traffic accident. Pieces of destroyed ships tumbled through space, some as large as buildings, others as small as coins, all of them moving at lethal velocities. "Control, this is Razor," Subin announced over the radio. Her voice calm despite flying through what most pilots would consider certain death. "I have visual on the Kethver command ship. They're hiding behind the wreck of their own destroyer." "Negative." Razor, came the response from the carrier Dagu's Pride. "That debris field is too dense. No way through." Subin looked at the maze of twisted metal and radioactive wreckage ahead of her. Chunks of ship hull spun lazily through space while electrical discharges arced between broken power conduits. It was beautiful in the way that hurricanes and avalanches were beautiful, deadly beyond measure, but magnificent to watch. "Control, you're breaking up," she lied smoothly. "Can't hear you. Going in." She had trained for this exact scenario in the asteroid belts around Jupiter, where rookie pilots learned to thread their ships through gaps that existed for mere seconds. The instructors called it threading the needle, and it had a casualty rate that would horrify most species. But humans had always excelled at turning impossible odds into just another Tuesday afternoon. Subin dove into the debris field like a surfer riding a tsunami. Her fighter twisted and rolled between chunks of metal, following a path that existed only in her mind. The Kethver command vessel loomed ahead, its crew probably laughing at the insane human pilot, who was about to be crushed by flying wreckage. They stopped laughing when her targeting system achieved lock. "Fox 3, Subin announced, launching 2 missiles through a gap. Between tumbling debris that was barely wider than her fighter's wingspan, the missiles streaked through the maze of wreckage, hit their guidance systems, recalculating their path. Hundreds of times per second as they navigated between obstacles. The Kethber command ship had perhaps 2 seconds to realize what was happening before the warheads struck their bridge. The explosion lit up the debris, field like a miniature sun, sending new chunks of metal spinning through space to join the existing chaos. Splash 1 command ship, Subin reported, pulling her fighter into a victory roll that took her through another impossible gap in the wreckage. Back aboard the devouring maw, Captain Hygiene had reached the ship's bridge. The Kethver captain, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a nightmare, stood behind an array of controls, his compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "You cannot be here," he hissed in broken galactic standard. "The gas, it should have killed you." Hyjin removed her helmet, letting the alien see her face clearly. The chlorine gas swirled around her head, but she showed no signs of distress. Growing up in the industrial zones of Earth had given her lungs that could process air that would choke most species. "You picked the wrong species to hunt," she said simply. "Surrender your ship." The Kethver captain looked at the human standing in his poisonous trap, breathing toxic air like it was a spring breeze, and realized that his empire had made a terrible mistake. These weren't just another prey species to be harvested. Were apex predators who had turned an entire world of death traps into their hunting ground. "We yield," he whispered across the battlefield. Similar scenes played out as human forces demonstrated the core principle of Deathworlder doctrine. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and humans had survived everything their homeworld could throw at them. Poison gas, radiation, crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere. These weren't obstacles to humans. They were just another day at the office. The Kethver Empire was learning a hard truth about the galaxy. When you hunt farmers, under human protection, you don't get to face farmers. You get to face the predators who chose to protect them. Admiral Lee Tae-young stood on the bridge of Sol's Hammer, staring at the massive planet that filled the main view screen. Kethmera Prime was a world of sharp edges and volcanic mountains, its surface scarred by centuries of strip mining and industrial warfare. This was the homeworld of the species that had turned genocide into an art form, that had devoured entire civilizations for breakfast. Now, 57 human warships hung in orbit around it like vultures waiting for carrion. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface," reported Captain Kim Jae-hoon from his tactical station. "Planetary defense grid is powering up. Orbital platforms are moving to intercept positions." He nodded grimly. The Kethver had some of the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. Weapon systems that could crack moons and shields that could deflect stellar radiation. On paper, their homeworld defenses should have been more than enough to drive off any attacking fleet, but humans had never been much good at following what was written on paper. "Commander Park So-young, status report on our targeting solutions," Lee ordered. The young officer's fingers danced across her console with practiced precision. She had spent the last 6 months studying every detail of Kethver military installations, memorizing the location of every weapon emplacement, every command center, every facility that had contributed to the Empire's reign of terror. "Sir, we have confirmed locks on 2,847 military targets across the planet's surface. Primary targets include the Imperial Command Complex, the Fleet Academy, and the breeding facilities where they processed their victims." Lee's jaw tightened at that last detail. Intelligence reports had confirmed the worst fears about Kethver society. They didn't just kill other species for food, they kept them as livestock, breeding them in massive facilities before slaughter. The images from liberated worlds would haunt human intelligence officers for years to come. "Major Cho Hyenwoo, are your Marines ready for planetary assault?" The grizzled Marine commander looked up from his preparation tablet, his scarred face showing the kind of expression that had made Kethver prisoners wet themselves during interrogation. "Sir, my boys are loaded for bear. We've got assault shuttles prepped, powered armor charged, and enough firepower to level whatever's left after the fleet gets done with the surface." Outstanding. They turned back to the main screen, where the alien world turned slowly beneath its blood-red sky. "Open communications. All frequencies. I want every Kethfer on that planet to hear this. The communication system crackled to life, and suddenly the Bridge of Souls hammer was broadcasting to an entire world of monsters. When the Kethper Emperor's image appeared on screen, Lee felt a moment of genuine disgust. The creature was as massive, easily 3 meters tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws and a mouthful of teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. Its eyes were the color of dried blood, and its voice carried the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. "So," the Emperor hissed, "the little mammals have come to play war. Do you know who you are threatening, humans?" I am Emperor Vashtak, the Devourer, ruler of 300 worlds, consumer of 1 billion lesser species. Admiral Lee stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back in the parade rest position he had learned as a cadet 40 years ago. When he spoke, his voice carried the calm authority of someone who had commanded fleets in the worst battles humanity had ever fought. "I am Admiral Lee Tae-hung of the United Colonial Navy. You have a simple choice, Emperor. Surrender unconditionally, and face trial for your crimes against the Zelhari and every other species you've murdered, or we will demonstrate why humanity has never been conquered." The Emperor's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass mixed with screaming. "You threaten an entire world with 50 ships? I have 1,000 defense platforms, 10,000 fighters, weapons that can boil your pathetic vessels like soup." "Not threatening," Lee replied with the same calm tone he might use to discuss the weather. "We're stating fact. You prey on the innocent. You prey on predators like you. Choose." Behind the Admiral, his bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. These weren't warriors seeking glory or conquerors dreaming of empire. They were professionals, doing a job they had trained for their entire careers. Captain Kim confirmed that every weapon system in the fleet was fully charged and ready to fire. Commander Park verified that their targeting computers had solutions for every military installation on the planet's surface. Major Cho's Marines checked their weapons one final time, ready to finish whatever the Navy started. "You cannot destroy a world," the Emperor snarled, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Watch us," said Lee simply. The Kethver Emperor looked at the faces surrounding Admiral Lee on the human bridge. These weren't the expressions of bloodthirsty conquerors or glory-seeking warriors. These were the calm, determined faces of exterminators who had found a particularly dangerous pest infestation. They showed no anger, no hatred, no emotion at all, just the professional competence of people who were very good at breaking things, for the first time in his long life. Emperor Vashtak, the Devourer, felt something his species had never experienced: genuine, bone-deep terror. We surrender," he whispered. The words echoed across every communication channel on the planet. In the space of 10 seconds, the Kethver Empire, a military power that had dominated 3 sectors of the galaxy for over 500 years, had capitulated completely to a species they had never heard of 6 months earlier. Admiral Lee nodded once. "Wise choice. You will order all military forces to stand down immediately. Your government will dissolve itself and submit to human oversight. All prisoners and livestock facilities will be opened for inspection. Any attempt at resistance will result in the complete sterilization of this world." "Yes," the Emperor said, his voice barely audible. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. The Kethver homeworld, once a monument to predatory cruelty, had become something resembling a civilized society under human military administration. The breeding facilities had been converted into refugee centers. The weapon factories now produced medical supplies and construction equipment. The former emperor spent his days in a detention cell, awaiting trial for crimes against sapient life. Ambassador Veltheri stood on the observation deck of her ship, Gentle Current, watching human patrol vessels move between the orbital defense platforms that now flew Earth's flag instead of the Kethver imperial symbol. The sight still amazed her, not because the humans had won, but because they had chosen to rebuild rather than simply destroy. "Ambassador," said Captain Odal Su, approaching with the formal bearing that all human officers seemed to possess, Admiral Lee wanted you to know that we'll be leaving a permanent garrison here, just in case some of the outer colonies get ideas about reconstituting the Empire. Velthari nodded, still processing everything she had witnessed. Her people had sent a distress call expecting medical frigates and refugee transports. Instead, they had received the most lethal military force in known space, wielded by a species that had turned compassion into a weapon of war. "Captain," she asked quietly, "why did your people come? You gained nothing from this war. No territory, no resources, no strategic advantage." Odalsu looked out at the stars, his expression thoughtful. He was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with the simple honesty that Velthari had come to associate with humans because someone had to, because the innocent deserved protection. Because that's what humans do. We fight the fights that others can't. We become the monsters. So that people like you don't have to. As the human fleet prepared for its return to Earth, they left behind more than just a military garrison. They left a new understanding that spread through every communication network in the galaxy, those who prey upon the weak, who turn genocide into policy, who feast on the innocent, would answer to the Deathworlders. The message was simple and absolute. Humanity was watching, and humanity did not forgive those who hurt the defenseless. The Zelhari had expected aid. They had received salvation. And the galaxy would never be the same. The end.